What's going on, guys? Welcome to episode 9 of Property is a Game of Finance. Today we are joined by Steve Palise. Welcome, mate.
Thanks, Jay.
No worries. So today, well, this is actually a 3-part series. We're going to do a couple episodes with Steve. First one, we're going to get a bit of background on him, how he got into the game, and then we'll go dive a little bit deeper into residential and commercial property. So you're a commercial buyer's agent.
I am, and a resi one, but I'm known for the commercial one. So
Yeah, but you started off in residential?
Started from residential. So yeah, I've actually purchased over 1,000 residential properties now. So people know me as a commercial guy, but I'm still definitely a fan of residential.
Yeah. So what were you doing before you became a buyer's agent?
So I studied mechatronics at university. So
What?
Mechatronic engineering. So designing robots and stuff like that. So my first job was designing like hospital machines and robotic limbs and stuff like that. Sounds cool, but you're sitting behind a desk typing code for 10 hours a day. So I'm a bit too social for that.
Yeah.
Then chased the dollars and got into mining. So just started designing mine sites, big crushers, grinders, structural systems and stuff like that. And just grafted for a few years, earning some okay money. But in the background, got lucky with residential. So I bought one in Western Sydney for 230 grand in 2012, I think it was. And it went up about 100 grand in the first year. So I was on 60 grand a year at the time because I was an intern. And I'm just like, far out, I've just made like 10 years worth of savings by buying a property. And then ADD Steve came out and just read every book, listened to every podcast, and then just kept accumulating from there. And then after I got up to about, I think it was about 8 properties at the time, I just chucked it in, went, I'm going to go work in buyer's agency because I'm looking at property all day, every day. And yeah, got into it that way.
Yeah, speaking of books, he's just put out a book. It's called Residential Property Investing Explained Simply. But earlier this year, was it this year or last year? Last year, he put out a book called Commercial Property Investing Explained Simply. So you can go to Steve Palise's website and you can use organic as the code word. You're going to give it away for free, aren't you?
Give it for free. Any of your listeners want it for
Fair
free?
income, mate.
It's not a get rich quick scheme book. It's literally like a textbook. So it's just fundamentals and learn the basics first.
And what you said about getting that 100K in equity in first year, it's such a common thing I hear from everyone that first gets into property. They do well and they figure out, okay, well, shit, I can make some money doing this, and then they make a career out of it. So that's good, man. When did you first become a buyer's agent?
Probably about 7 years ago. So I just joined a little startup company, and it was a residential one, and then we just kept growing, and like I said, get like 1,000 residentials under my belt.
Yeah.
And then slowly progressed into commercial from there.
Yeah. When did that come into it?
Probably about 2 years in. I just had a client who really wanted to buy a commercial property, and I started researching commercial, and I looked at the numbers, and I'm just like, I'm missing something here. Like this can't be this attractive where you buy like $1 million industrial warehouse and it gives you 35 grand a year passive income. Like I'm just like, what am I missing here? And then literally I thought it was a trap, and then bought 1, bought 2, and then all of a sudden I was buying 3 or 4 a month, and now I'm known as a commercial guy. It's
specifically about the yields, right? Because we're talking about, 6.5% yield is quite achievable, and that's a net yield. And when you're looking at a residential property and someone finds you a residential property that's over 6% yield, they lose their shit like, wow, but that's gross.
It's also gross.
Yeah,
so it ends up being like a 3% kind of yield. But you'll typically get 2 to 3 times cash flow with commercial. But 5 years ago, you were talking 7 to 11% net yields.
So why's that gone down?
Interest rates were higher. So they've gone back up now, but back then you were paying kind of 4.5%, 5%. So the difference in yields to kind of mortgage repayments was kind of there. Then rates came down. You could get commercial mortgages at 3.5%. But now we're seeing it come up. And we'll have a chat, I think, in a later episode about kind of the market at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. So when you started your own business, you were pretty well established in commercial because you've gone quite heavy on the commercial side of things, right?
Yeah.
So in your business now, what percentage of your business is commercial and residential buying?
So it's probably about 70-30. And then so I actually released the residential book because I don't want people thinking
70-30, 70 commercial?
70 commercial.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah. I guessed that before you came in.
Yeah, so,
that's funny.
But I still love residential, and like I said, that's why I brought out my book, because I'm just like, there is a right time for residential, and we've had this chat many times off air. So it's just about making the right decision. But because my commercial book came out first, I was just getting clients that they'd read the book and be like, oh, this is really attractive, and then reach out.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's just dependent on the client. You've got to get the right property at the right time.
you know you're going to get a shitload more inquiries on residential now, mate.
No, I love residential. Like I said, I bought 8 residential before I even dipped my toe into commercial. Like residential definitely has a place.
So we said before the episode, you know, it's right now it's considered a buyer's market, right? And you don't think that there's a difference between buyer's market and seller's market?
It shouldn't make a difference to your long-term investing. Like 2 years ago, people were saying, oh, yep, residential, commercial investing, it's a long-term game. But then as soon as it becomes a soft market, people go, oh, time to jump in and get a bargain. I hate to tell them, it doesn't, like it helps you saving 20, 30 grand on a purchase price. Yep, it gives you a little bit of money. But in the grand scheme of things, if you're buying like my first property that I bought for 230 that went up to like 300, 330 in the first year, would it have mattered that much if I bought it for 215 or 210? Like you got to think bigger with residential. Yes, you want to buy well, but just trying to pick up something at the bottom of the market. Bottom of the market doesn't mean it's going to take off and grow straight away. Like it's not a bouncy ball. You don't drop it and it comes back up. The bottom of the market might last 5 years. So who cares if you save 30 grand? You're still sitting at the bottom of the market for 5 years. So buy something that has demand. It's all supply and demand. That's with every produce, every property, supply and demand. So focus on long term. So if you're buying something that's going to be more demand in 10 years time, you're onto a winner. Don't focus the next 6 months. It's a huge amount of money you're putting into a deal.
So why then, like, because most people would say, and still this is what I believe, is most people would start with residential, right? And that's because the capital growth is a lot better with residential and cash flow is king when it comes to commercial. So why is residential capital growth so much better than commercial?
It's not. You're an idiot.
Yes. Good. Tell me more.
So it's purely a misconception.
Yeah. Okay.
So if that was the case, you'd end up with $1 million house sitting next to a 500 grand warehouse, and that $1 million house going to $2 million, and the warehouse staying at 500,000. So why would someone not be in the $2 million house going, why don't I just buy that $500,000 warehouse that rents for 3 times as much as my house? And that's where the misconception comes from, because normally residential properties grow first and then the commercial will follow. So during the good times, the resi investors say, oh, look how much money I've made. Commercial's still sitting there. But long term, they've still had 5-7% capital growth. It just happens slightly
year
in a different cycle. On average, same as, and it has to. Like,
interesting.
Certain commercials won't grow the same as certain like residential properties. Like you go buy a high density off the plan apartment, high density off the plan office. That is not going to grow the same as a warehouse, because fundamentally it's a concrete box in the sky. A warehouse has a land component. Much how like buying an off the plan apartment in the CBD won't grow the same as a house. So you're not comparing like for like. So the stats get skewed a little bit if you look at the big data, because office space is such a big part of it. And then retail, like one on the main street is a completely different growth rate to 1-2 streets back, because they're not in the same rental growth.
Now I'm trying to think, why doesn't everyone buy commercial? Is it probably because of the barrier to entry? Like,
spot on, barrier to entry. So
you could buy a $450,000 house with like 60 grand, right? Exactly. But to buy the same commercial property, you got to double that and then some.
Yep. So your minimum, you need 20% deposit.
Yeah.
Normally 30% as you're an established investor. So if I've got like a 25-year-old client and he comes to me, I'm not buying him commercial property from the get-go. If he wants to be an aggressive investor and he's got time on his side, I would much rather go out and buy 3 residential properties on 90% loans, even though you pay lender's mortgage insurance, than 1 commercial on a 70%. Because if I do get the same capital growth I just spoke about, he makes 3 times as much. So he's got 3 times more much power to then buy commercial and do developments and things like that. But on the flip side, if I've got a 65-year-old client, buying a neutrally geared residential does not help his retirement. He's looking for passive income, so we have to go commercial. So it's just a balance between what you're trying to achieve over what time frame versus what your risk profile is versus what your serviceability versus borrowing capacity actually is, and then going from there. But property, the whole reason property is a good investment asset class is leverage. No other asset class can you borrow 70, 80, 90% of someone else's money and play with big numbers like that. And that's where you get the returns. Yeah.
What about the difference between like a $500,000 commercial property versus a $1.5 million commercial property?
Yeah. So
besides the barrier to entry for a $1.5 million one.
Yeah, but you say that though. A lot of people have a couple residential properties with quite a lot of equity sitting there, and they just don't know what they're sitting on. This is the hard thing to answer like property questions with commercial, because they are so varied. Like an office, an answer is completely different to a retail, which is completely different to industrial. But just generally, if you're buying, say, let's go industrial. We'll use that as an example because it's a bit more like for like. If you go out and you buy, say, a $500,000 industrial warehouse in, say, Brisbane, it's going to be a little small warehouse, 150, 250 square meters. The tenant will be small, so it'll be like average Joe's electrical services, things like that. And the leases will be shorter. You're not going to get a 10-year lease or a 5-year lease. It'll be a 2x2, 3x3, maybe a 4x4 if you're lucky. But the thing with small businesses, they go one or two ways. They grow and they outgrow the space, or they kind of flounder about and close up shop. So the volatility of the tenant is more. So you're getting shorter leases and they're probably going to move on every 5, 6, 7 years, and then you get a new tenant. The benefit...
But in saying that, the net is a bit wider so that other smaller businesses would be able to take it up quite quickly. So what's the vacancy period then for something like that?
Depends where you buy. If you're looking in Townsville, you're talking 12 to 24 months. If you're looking in Brisbane, Middle Ring, it's kind of 1 to 3 months. Sunshine Coast, there's waiting lists most of the time. There's a really hot market. And that's the positive, because they can be anything. They can be a car mechanic, wholesaler, distributor, storage, little fabricators. So they've got some use. So they fill it quite quickly in those kind of small, in the good areas.
Yeah.
But if you go buy a 1.5 mil one, you're going to get a bigger business, one with 20 staff. They're signing the long leases. They're a bit stickier because they're not in the game of buying their own properties. They just want to rent a space for long term. So you'll have them probably 7 to 15 years. But if you lose them, then you're basically going to have a property vacant for 6, 12, 24 months because there's not 1,000 big businesses just ready to jump on it. But then the next one you get is probably going to be there for 15 years. Yeah. So there's a pro and a con. There are some advantages. You get in the higher price brackets, you start looking at like standalone kind of properties, multi-tenancy, development opportunities, where the little 500K ones, you're going to be on like a little body corporate kind of, just a little set and forget type one with no real value add.
Yeah, so I guess the other question I would have then about that vacancy period, because some of those terms you were saying 12, 24 months, that's a significant amount of time to be making repayments without having any cash flow come in. So what's the best thing a client can do to prepare themselves for that? Plan
for it. So whenever you got a lease kind of finishing, is make sure you got enough buffer for whatever you think the vacancy period is to pay the mortgage. You got to look at it long term though. And I've had this argument with resi people where they go, like say we buy $1 million warehouse and I say, okay, there's going to be 6 months worth of vacancy. They go, that's too high risk. I'm just going to buy residential. If you're getting that 6 month vacancy every 7, 10, 15 years, it's no different to having a residential that goes vacant every couple of years for 2 weeks. It's the same net result. You just kind of cop it in one go.
Yeah.
But you also got to realize you've been cash flow positive for so long. Like if I buy a $1 million commercial and it's $30,000 a year positive, in 5 years' time when the lease is finished, if they do leave, you've actually got $150,000 sitting there in cash that you didn't have. Whereas if you go buy $1 million residential that costs you, say, 5-10 grand a year hold, you're 50 grand negative. So they're trying to say it's more high risk, even though you can make the cash reserves just from the cash flow.
Yeah.
So you can kind of mitigate that risk. But the biggest thing is just plan for it. Like just know kind of what you got, what the vacancy periods are, then double it. If you think it's going to be a 3-6 month vacancy, have 12 months worth of mortgage repayment sitting there.
Yeah.
Once the tenant signs a new lease, cool, you can go spend those funds elsewhere.
Cash buffer's the only thing. There's no landlord insurance you can get for vacancies.
There is, but to be honest, a lot of the times they're kind of not worth the money. Like they're quite expensive to kind of guarantee.
Yeah.
Part of commercial is buying well. So like part of a lease with a commercial, you've got bonds, same as residential, where they pay, generally it's kind of 3 months-ish bond. But then you've also got guarantees. So someone will guarantee that they're going to fulfill the lease. And that can be a bank guarantee, a personal guarantee. Usually like the business owner will put his like house up as collateral. So you can basically get the whole lease period without actually having to stress that you're going to lose your tenant and not get your money. So whereas good luck getting that with residential.
Yeah. Something that you touched on before that I want to go back and touch on again, because I think it's important, the whole residential versus commercial argument, the fact that you can get into a residential property with, less than half the money. 60K would get you into a 450K property, where if you were to buy the same price but a commercial property, you'd have to save up another 80 grand. And the time it takes you to do that, you're not going to be exposed to the market at all. The market's probably gone away from you a bit. So I feel like that's really the main reason, right? Is because if you're on average, if the growth is relatively the same, but you're getting more cash flow, some would argue that commercial might be better in that sense. So, and that's, mate, if you're using a buyer's agent, the whole reason to use a buyer's agent is to outperform the average, right? Because you have an average Australia-wide. if you use a buyer's agent, you're outperforming the average, and that's all you can want.
Yeah, because they're backing up with research at least, and they're doing it well, and they're buying it well. But that's the thing with the commercial. It is a better performer if you get it right. If you buy in the good location, get the same capital growth, same like better cash flow, you're performing better long term. But like you said, not everyone has the deposit to get into it. The issue with commercial, if you don't know what you're doing, you can shoot yourself in the foot very easily. Like if you go out and buy a bad commercial and it sits there vacant for 2, 3, 4 years, not only is that a financial burden on you for quite some time, the value of the property goes down until you get a tenant as well. And you're not going to be able to invest in residential as well. So you're also holding up your other investing. So if you get it wrong, there are much bigger problems that you're going to have. Residential, as long as long term, you're going to be all right. As long as throw the dart at the dartboard, as long as you're not buying in a flood zone and you're in a good kind of inner city area and you tick a few fundamentals, it'll have little ups and downs, but long term, you'll have all right. You'll have a tenant, it'll kind of pay for itself. You can pay the difference in the mortgage and repayments. But commercial, there's a lot more at stake if you don't know what you're doing.
That's what I was going to say as well, because I've never done a commercial finance application for a client that isn't using a buyer's agent. The only ones I've done is the ones I've sent you. So I couldn't imagine, because the support that you get from the buyer's agent is massive. Like, you guys know everything about it. You've done all the due diligence, and typically it's not too much of an issue. So I couldn't imagine a client just coming to me and say, I want to buy this bloody shop or something like that. I'm like,
there's generally, on a simple commercial, there's 30 to 50 hours due diligence, because you got to do lease review, contract review, tenant interviews, vacancy occupancy study. You got to talk to town planners to find out what's going on in the area, property managers, do competition analysis, foot and road traffic analysis. Residential, you tick a few of the fundamentals and you're kind of okay. So there's a lot more work with it. So a lot more areas to stuff it up. Could get lucky, but if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to burn yourself.
Yeah. Man, we're pretty much at the end of the first episode, but I did want to touch on when I first came to this office. I remember sitting in here and we had our meeting, and because I met you years ago before you started your company, and you spoke to my mate Jason, and he's told me to speak to you, and mate, that was like, that must have been like 2015 or something. And you gave me some advice that I didn't take, and it ended up being the wrong thing to do. So should have took your advice then. But to think all that time gone past, mate, I thought about you straight away, and I called you up. I was like, let's get this going. Let's do a referral. I knew you weren't going to send me shit, but I just wanted someone to I wanted to have someone to send to, so that I knew my clients were looked after. And feedback's been great, man.
Well, you're wrong, because I've been sending you clients.
Oh yeah, hey, it took a bit, but nah, it's good. It's been really good, man.
Nah, it's been a pleasure, man, and your business is going well. I'm really proud of you.
Yeah, cheers, bro. All right, let's plug the book again. So we've got Residential Property Investing Explained Simply, just came out. Organic is the promo code. Chuck that on and you get it for free.
Go to my website, click. You can even buy them together for free as well as a bundle. Just at checkout, just write organic and you get it for free.
Beautiful. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks, guys.